All right, memory, lecture 2. Here's what we're going to be looking at in this lecture: how do we get information out of memory retrieval. So we talked about encoding and storage last time, and now we're going to talk about how do we get stuff back out. How accurate are our memories? What are the implications of the fallibility of memory? And then a couple theories about why we forget. All right, so to get us started, I am going to read you a story. And then what I'd like you to do is try to remember all the facts and without writing anything down, and then try to relate this story to somebody, or even try to relate it back to yourself, recalling the details. All right, here goes. A TWA Boeing 747 had just taken off from Miami International Airport for Los Angeles when a passenger near the rear of the aircraft announced that the plane was being taken over by the People's Revolutionary Army for the liberation of the oppressed. The hijacker then held a .357 Magnum to the head of Jack Swanson, a flight attendant, and forced him to open the cockpit door. There, the hijacker confronted the pilot, Jane Randall, and ordered her to change the course for Cuba. The pilot radioed the Miami Air Traffic Control Center to report the situation, but then suddenly hurled the microphone at the hijacker, who fell backward through the open cockpit door and onto the floor, where angry passengers took over from there. The plane landed in Miami a few minutes later, and the hijacker was arrested. So now pause this video and for a couple minutes try to recall the facts of that as to the best of your ability. And if somebody's next to you or approximate to you, try to relate the story that I just read to you to them. All right, so go do that. So presumably you're back at this point, and I'm going to read the story to you again. TWA Boeing 747 had just taken off from Miami International Airport for Los Angeles when a passenger near the rear of the aircraft announced that the plane was being taken over by the People's Revolutionary Army for the liberation of the oppressed. The hijacker then held a .357 Magnum to the head of Jack Swanson, a flight attendant, and forced him to open the cockpit door. There, the hijacker confronted the pilot, Jane Randall, and ordered her to change the course for Cuba. The pilot radioed the Miami Air Traffic Control Center to report the situation, but then suddenly hurled the microphone at the hijacker, who fell backward through the open cockpit door and onto the floor, where angry passengers took over from there. The plane landed in Miami a few minutes later, and the hijacker was arrested. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is kind of think about the accuracy of your recall and compare it against the actual story. It could be that you were pretty accurate in recall the facts, but there's things that reliably happen in this sort of activity, and this is sort of known as the rumor chain. And the idea is that as you tell it to one person, each time that the story gets retold, things happen. There's a couple things that reliably happen that illustrate that memory really is a reconstructive process. That is, it's not a videotape recording everything that you experience into your brain so that you can just pull it back out with perfect accuracy. It doesn't work like that. There's a couple of phenomenon that occur pretty reliably in this sort of reconstructive process. That is, leveling is the first one, and this is a tendency to kind of simplify the material. The sort of the details get left out and things. The story gets a heck of a lot shorter than it initially is told. There's another thing called shaping that happens, and that's when different people may highlight or cue in on certain things. They overemphasize certain details based on their own experience and their own expectations. And because of they've had some experience maybe in this sort of thing, it would be unfortunate if that would be the case, but maybe they'll recall things that are more consistent with their own personal experience better than people that have not had any experience with this sort of thing. And then assimilation is the third thing that happens, and this is when the details of the story will be changed to fit the person's own background, knowledge, and expectations. So here we kind of tweak the story so that it's consistent with our own experience. And it's a little bit different than shaping. Assimilation is more incorporating an event or a particular story like this so that fits in with our prior knowledge, rather than kind of highlighting things that are consistent with experiences that we've had in the past. Um, Experiences basically that we form schemas, excuse me, of these are those organized clusters of information based on experience. We've stored information in the form of schemas. So maybe this hijacking experience sort of maps onto a prior experience that we've had. So we're more likely to recall certain details as opposed to people that don't have that experience. So the bottom line here is this, that memory is a reconstructive process. We have certainly experiences and then we recall them sometime later. And it's highly questionable the accuracy of our recall. Certainly we can recall some stuff accurately, but really there is quite a bit of unreliability when it comes to memory, because it is truly a reconstructive process. So to get stuff back out, once it's in there, it's encoded into memory and stored, we want to get it back out. So we rely on certain things to get that information back out. One of the things we rely on is retrieval cues. For example, if I ask you what's the state capital of North Carolina, you might not know what that is, but if you do, and you have some difficulty retrieving it, it's in there, but you can't quite get it out. If I give you a cue, like it starts with an R, something like that, you might, oh yeah, it's Raleigh, North Carolina. That's the capital of North Carolina. So verbal cues can trigger the retrieval, so we can be struggling. It's known as a tip of the tongue phenomenon. That is, you know you have it in there, you just can't quite get it out, and then all it takes is somebody to give you a little cue like that, and out it comes. Contextual cues help as well. So there's some instances where if you return to the environment or the context in which the memory was formed in the first place. This is called reinstating the context of an event. That is, certain memories might be triggered that weren't being triggered in some other context. That's why maybe somebody's an eyewitness to a crime and they're trying to sort out the facts and the details of the crime, and so they take the eyewitness back to the scene of the crime, and then the witness might be able to retrieve some details that maybe they hadn't been able to retrieve before. And I invite you to try to think of some other cues that might trigger memories. Smell, for example. Olfactory cues are a powerful cue to memory. There's other ones as well that you might know of and that might work for you. But we rely on these cues to get stuff back out once it's been encoded in. But again, by and large, memory is a reconstructive process. So that's problematic in many different contexts. So the legal realm, for example, when people bring eyewitness testimony into a trial proceedings, for example, the defense and the prosecution deal with these eyewitnesses on their own terms, because we have what's called an adversarial system of justice, and so it's one side against the other, the defendant against the prosecution, defense against the prosecution. So eyewitness testimony can often be a powerful source of testimony. But there's problems with eyewitness testimony, because there's problems with memory as a reconstructive process. So an example of this was a study conducted by Allport and Postman back in '47, and they showed their research participants images like this, where here it's a white guy robbing a black guy in a subway, and then so they're shown the image, and then they're asked, well, who is holding the straight razor? And reliably, it's reported that the participants report it's the black guy, or the African American, that's holding the razor, and this is because of stereotype thinking. A stereotype is a form of a schema. It's an organized cluster of information based on experience. It may not be direct experience, but it's based on hearsay and beliefs and stereotypical beliefs, cognitions that you have about people based on their group membership. and that's problematic because it can lead to serious trouble in the legal realm when juries can be swayed. The opinions of juries can be swayed with eyewitness testimony. So there are problems in reconstruction. So think of memory as an active process. That is, what really happened, reality, so to speak, can be altered or changed to fit in with our schemas. So our prior experience and expectations can exert a powerful influence over what we recall. So here's an example of another problem of reconstruction. We're gonna name these problems. That is, the accuracy of our recall can be affected by a couple of different things. So here's an example of an interesting study that was conducted by Elizabeth Loftus, who's a big name in cognition or cognitive psychology, particularly in this in memory and the reconstructive nature of memory. So here's the study. So a group of people was shown a video of an accident. And another group was shown a video of the same accident. And then the manipulation was that a so-called individual attorney, I guess, asked a so-called leading question to the group. So one group was asked a question about how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. The other group was asked about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. So the difference is just this one word, hit, smashed. And so the idea was that there would be a difference in how the participants responded to the question, did you see any broken glass? That is, they asked them 1 week later after they watched the video and asked this leading question, did you see any broken glass? So in the group that got the hit, in the leading question, of 14% said, yeah, there was some broken glass. And then 32% who were asked how fast were they going when they smashed into each other said they saw broken glass. So that's a substantial difference. So nearly twice as many people in the smashed condition recalled seeing broken glass. They both watched the same film. And since it's an experiment, you could say, well, why do you see that difference in recall? Well, it's because of the difference in the words that were used in the leading question, hit versus smash. So hit, when cars hit each other, we have a schema that's associated when cars hit each other. We also have a schema that's for when cars smash into each other. So those leading questions, those single words activated schemas that skewed the memory in their direction. So this is why attorneys get the big bucks, some of them anyway, because they really have to be on their toes. They have to be listening to every word the prosecution or the defense says, or whatever side they're on, because eyewitness testimony and jurors thinking about the evidence can be skewed just by single words. Introducing single words can skew memories, they can skew opinions and attitudes and everything else. So problems of reconstruction are serious in the legal realm and in also other domains. Here's one of the problems of reconstruction. In reconstruction, we'll give it a name, the misinformation effect. That has to do with the introduction of misleading information like hit or smash. And this changes the memory of the actual event. So this is why attorneys will say that they object, that the defense or the prosecution is leading the witness possibly with these misleading words. And the action of this misleading information is that it activates these existing schemas. And attorneys who are clever and have studied up on this, they want to win in the court of law, and so they know how memory works. Not everybody does. All right, so if you want, you could pause this video and watch the video that I have under the supplementary websites on eyewitness testimony. It just shows you, it's an example of this, how misleading information can be introduced at an important moment, and it could skew witnesses' recall of what actually happened. The other problem in reconstruction I wanted to touch on was the source monitoring error, or it's referred to as misattribution as well. So this is when memory is derived from one source is misattributed to another source. That is, we kind of misremember the source of the memory. And this is problematic in many instances, but in cases of possibly reported sexual abuse or physical abuse or some sort of abuse, misattribution is a serious issue, because if, let's say, an individual, a child recalls being abused by their uncle, and they're pretty clear that it was their uncle, but they're misattributing the source of the memory to that individual, whereas actually it was somebody else. So here you have somebody being implicated in an awful crime, based on source monitoring, or based on misattribution. So we can misremember all kinds of different things. So we could think we actually experienced something when we actually read it in a book or saw it in a movie, or dreamt of it. Sometimes we're so convinced that of something, that somebody said something, that we fail to sort of question the source of our recall, or the fallibility of our recall. I've included another video, Lost in them all, that you could watch if you want to pause this, that illustrates this source monitoring error. It's really kind of easy to have our recall manipulated, such that it's really easy to form what are essentially false memories, things that memories that we have that were really generated by either, by some other source. We think they're actual memories, actual events that happened to us, but they're actually coming from a different source. All right, concept check here. Tyler witnessed an automobile accident and heard one of the bystanders casually mention that the driver was probably intoxicated, even though the driver had not been drinking and had never crossed the center line. Because of this, Tyler tells the police officer investigating the accident that the car had been weaving all over the road. Tyler's faulty recall best illustrates this would probably be the misinformation effect. That is, this individual says, I was probably drunk or something like that. And then that person, Tyler, incorporated this into their recollection of what happened, and so it skewed his memory of the actual events. All right, I wanted to touch on this repressed memories controversy because it's important. It really pertains to this reconstructive nature of memory. So there was a time, I believe it was back in the 90s, where there was a number of cases that made it into the national press about, I think that they were almost women exclusively that had come forward, and some of them were in their 20s or 30s, and they had claimed that they'd been sexually abused by a family member, and the cases went to trial, and in some cases the family members were found guilty on the basis of this recalled memory of being abused, and in some cases they weren't. But it really started a sort of a conversation about the accuracy of recall. Is it possible, for example, to experience trauma like sexual abuse or physical abuse when we're, let's say, prepubescent, let's say we're 8 years old or something like that, and then repress that memory only to have it surface 20 years later when we're 28 or 30 or whatever? So that's the real question, and often these stories are discovered, or these memories are uncovered or recovered in the context of therapy, where you have clinicians working with the individual. Maybe they're struggling in some area of their life, and a clinician might eventually, through the therapeutic relationship and all the conversations and so forth that happen in that context, land on the notion that the person was sexually abused, then then it becomes a matter of who is the perpetrator, and then accusations are leveled, and then the authorities become involved, and then it's a nightmare for everybody. So this is the repressed memories controversy. Really, it has to do with, the question of can we bury memories for years and years and years only to have them return, for us to retrieve those memories, so much so that we're so convinced that it's something that actually happened that we can, particularly if it was criminal activity, unwanted sexual contact or something like that, that we're willing to come forward and accuse somebody publicly of misconduct. So there's two basic sides to this. On the one hand, are the clinicians, these well-meaning clinicians that are working with individuals who are struggling, and then they through the therapeutic process they land on the notion that there was some abuse. So on the one hand, the clinicians believe that these clients or these patients' stories should be accepted at face value. They're not in the business of questioning somebody's experience or their feelings about something. Maybe it's just a vague feeling that something happened when they were young. So the clinicians believe that they should accept these people's stories at face value and believe them to be true, because they're not, possibly these people have never been heard before, or never felt like anybody's really listened to them or paid attention to them before. Also, there's research that shows that we can be amnestic for traumatic memories. That is, things can happen that are awful, and then that gets buried because it's too anxiety producing for us to face that. And this is consistent with Freud's idea of repression, or the defense mechanism of repression, which we'll talk about in a bit, a couple of chapters from now. So Freud believed that there's certain emotions and thoughts and that are so unacceptable to us for whatever reason, that we're motivated to forget those experiences, and we bury them, we repress them. And then they manifest in other ways because they're down there and they're kind of festering away, and they manifest in the form of anxiety and neurotic behavior, which is a term that they used back in Freud's time, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's the side of the clinical folks. And then on the other hand, you have memory researchers like Elizabeth Loftus, who are saying that, memory is a reconstructive process, and it's highly malleable and highly fallible. So these reports should be not accepted at face value, but rather, because of these effects like the misinformation effect, source monitoring error, that there should be some sort of corroborating evidence to accompany somebody's claim that they were abused or something like that in the past, before somebody goes to trial and is possibly convicted of a crime that quite possibly they didn't commit. And also the research shows that false memories can be pretty easily created. And we kind of had that experience when I read you the list of the items that pertain to sleep, and that I suspect that some of you had sleep in your lists, and when I asked you to recall that list of words that were associated with sleep, but I never read sleep. So some people can be quite confident that a recollection is accurate and it's true, but it's quite false. So here was a statement that was made by the APA, American Psychiatric Association, at that time back in the early 90s. It is not known how to distinguish with complete accuracy memories based on true events from those derived from other sources. So it's really, in particular when we're talking about recall of events that occurred, 5, 10, 15 years prior, it's really, really difficult to sort out what's accurate and what's not, when it comes to these events. So really, clinicians need to understand, as they work with individuals, how memory works. This is something that can't be ignored. If you're a clinician, usually you have some training in cognitive psychology. You understand that truly that memory is a reconstructive process at best. and you probably shouldn't take what individuals are recalling, particularly if it's just based on a feeling, um, without trying to at least get some sort of corroborating evidence. That would, I mean, certainly if the person had been abused, then having other people come forward and corroborate that, confirm that that probably was something that was going on, would be helpful if that person wanted to pursue justice. All right. So let's talk about forgetting. Stuff goes away. We get it in there, and then at some point we can't get it back out. That's forgetting. So long-term memory storage, we discussed a little bit in the last lecture, and the capacity of long-term memory is potentially unlimited. You saw the clip on Kim Peek. You can remember 12,000 books in his brain. He can recall where particular words are in particular lines in those books, which is phenomenal. So it's potentially unlimited. So it's pretty clear that when stuff gets in there, it kind of stays there. Unlimited capacity, permanence. Some of the evidence for permanence, that is, does it last? The memory codes once formed, are they permanent? Flashbulb memories is one area where people have looked at, and a flashbulb memory is it's similar to an autobiographical memory. It's like an event that's sort of stamped out in time, marked with time. 9/11 I've got here as the image, and that's, I mean, I remember that day. I don't remember much the day after, the day before, but I certainly remember that day. Waking up, and I literally, I can picture it in my mind's eye, like I'm reliving it. I can just close my eyes um, and remember. I think with a degree of accuracy of, getting up, kind of just a, beautiful September morning, just like any other awesome fall day in New England. And my wife was watching the morning shows on TV, and it's like the buzz was that a plane had crashed into the Twin Towers, then another one hit, and then it was then it was clear that there was something clearly very, very awful going on. So I remember that day pretty clearly. I know that it's not 100% accurate, but I do recall that day much clearer than I do any other day of that year. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And so these flashbulb memories are sort of burnt into our mind's eye, and we can recall with a pretty degree of accuracy what was going on. But there's inconsistencies with people's memory, even though they're sort of locked and bound up in time, these significant events. There's inaccuracies and inconsistencies. So is there any evidence to suggest that once a memory code is formed, that it stays or it remains in that form? The answer is no. In fact, when we recall events, we're actually making them malleable when we recall them, and then we store them away, and they're going to quite possibly be a bit different when we store them away. And it could be that our emotional response to them will be different, and that might affect our recall as well. So regardless, we do forget, and there's different theories of forgetting. One of the theories of forgetting has to do with just basically not getting stuff in there very well in the first place. So this is ineffective encoding. Encoding was one of the first processes that we talked about with respect to memory. So stuff gets in. Pseudo forgetting has to do with believing that we learned something or that something was encoded when it was actually not encoded at all. That is, we sure we remembered having some experience or so forth when we actually didn't have that experience at all. This is pseudo forgetting. It's a memory that we think is a memory, but it's actually not. It's nothing. The event actually that we think we recall never actually occurred. Decay theory has to do with memory traces fading with time. So sensory memory evaporates over a very short period of time. Short-term memory quite possibly as well. That is, both sensory and short-term memory have their capacities and limitations and so forth. Very little evidence for loss of long-term memories due to decay. So the research that's been done kind of locates decay in sensory and short, but no good evidence to suggest that long-term memories fade away over time. The theory that is probably the strongest with respect to why we fail to retrieve information, why we forget, is interference theory. So there's a couple of different flavors of interference. We have retroactive interference and proactive interference. So think of retroactive interference as when new learning interferes with previous learning. So we're always kind of in the state of learning. We're having new experiences, and then those new experiences and new facts and so forth that we've learned gets in the way of our recall of learning that we've done in the past. So that learning of new things overwrites or essentially obscures existing knowledge. And then there's proactive interference that has things going in the other direction. So that's old learning, learning that we've done previously, interferes with new, and it makes it harder to learn that new material. And this is particularly the case when new and old material is similar. And you see this in the case of learning language in some cases. People have difficulty recalling quite possibly information that they learned about a language that they've taken in the past. And it could be that past learning bumps up against new learning because languages in some cases are pretty similar in their syntax and the words may be similar. Some people might find that this actually helps them, but if you have two subjects that are quite similar, there's substantial overlap between concepts and terms and that sort of thing. It could be that the two get conflated. So they actually bump up against each other and make it difficult to remember old and new information. So proactive interference, old learning interferes with new and makes it harder to learn new material. So this person studied French, now they're studying Spanish. So now the learning that they've done when they learned French is interfering with their ability to recall the learning that they're doing now in Spanish. And retroactive interference is just the opposite. That's when the learning that we're doing now interferes with our ability to recall existing knowledge. All right, so again, I want to make the point that when there's substantial similarity or overlap between learning and experiences that we've had, they'll tend to conflate and interfere, and this affects recall. All right, here's the concept check. Blank occurs when old information impairs the retention of newly learned information. A, B, C, or D? Answer is A, proactive interference. That's old stuff interfering with new stuff. Proactive interference. All right, so here's the learning objectives. Take a look at these. Notice that there's red font objectives. That means you're going to have to get into the text and read about the role of the hippocampus. And also read about procedural memory, declarative. That is, declarative is concerning semantic and episodic memory. So read about those because you can expect quiz and test questions from that material, but we just didn't cover it in the lecture.